former elite agent hides as a mall Santa to escape his violent past. But when a ruthless gang threatens the town, he's forced to fight back, revealing skills no one expected and a truth he can no longer run from. The shopping mall was alive with the spirit of Christmas. Warm lights twinkled above garlands of pine, and a gentle hum of carols floated through the air. Families moved from store to store, their arms heavy with bags, their faces glowing with holiday cheer. At the center of it all, Jack Frost sat in a plush red chair, wearing the familiar suit of Santa Claus. Children lined up eagerly, their excited whispers blending into a chorus of innocence. Jack smiled warmly beneath the fluffy white beard, his eyes crinkling. He listened patiently to their requests for toys and gadgets, offering a deep, jolly ho, ho, ho that filled their hearts with joy. Yet behind the carefully practiced voice, his thoughts lingered on the piece he had carved for himself here. "Thank you, Santa," a little girl chirped as she clutched a candy cane. Her mother smiled at Jack gratefully before leading her daughter away. "Next!" called Sarah, the mall's manager, her voice brimming with efficiency. She was a tall woman with kind, perceptive eyes and an unwavering belief in Jack's ability to keep the holiday magic alive. "You're doing a great job, Jack. The kids love you." "Part of the job," Jack replied with a wink, his tone lighthearted but his manner distant. Sarah studied him for a moment longer, sensing the guarded man behind the Santa suit, but she let it go. Everything about the scene was perfect. The decorations, the music, the glow of content families. Jack savored it, silently grateful for the quiet anonymity this role gave him. After all, no one questioned Santa Claus. And then it happened. At first it was faint, just a low rumble that seemed like thunder in the distance. Jack's hand froze mid-wave as his instincts prickled, recognizing a sound that had no place here. He glanced toward the entrance of the mall. The rumble grew louder. The glass doors burst open, and a chilling gust swept inside, scattering papers and setting the lights swaying. The hum of carols faltered as shoppers turned, their conversations hushed. The unmistakable growl of motorcycles filled the air, heavy and menacing. Jack's gaze sharpened beneath his jovial mask. 4 riders rolled into the mall, their engines snarling, tires screeching against the polished tiles. The lead biker dismounted first, tall and lean, his leather jacket bore a snake emblem etched in silver. His eyes scanned the mall with a mixture of contempt and amusement. Chaos erupted as screams filled the air. Families scrambled for safety, pushing into stores and shielding their children. The riders laughed, smashing decorations with steel-toed boots and revving their engines. A wreath fell to the ground, crushed under heavy tires. Jack stood slowly, his gloved hands tightening. Sarah appeared beside him, her face pale as she whispered, "Jack, what do we do?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze fixed on the gang's leader, a cold weight settling in his chest. For the first time in years, his quiet life felt like it was slipping away. "Keep everyone calm," Jack said softly, his voice steady but edged with something harder. The lead rider turned, locking eyes with Jack across the chaos. A slow, predatory grin stretched across his face, as though he recognized something about the man in the Santa suit. "Ho, ho, ho!" the biker sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Jack Frost stood his ground. The rumble of engines echoed through the mall like an approaching storm. The leader of the gang, a man with slicked-back hair and a snake-toothed grin, stepped forward, his heavy boots leaving scuff marks on the polished tiles. Behind him, 3 other bikers dismounted, their jackets adorned with the same silver cobra emblem. They moved with deliberate menace, their laughter cruel as they scanned the terrified faces of shoppers. "All right, folks," the leader shouted, his voice booming. "Santa's got a new set of helpers today." He smashed a bat against a glass display, sending shards scattering like ice. A few children cried out, their parents hurriedly pulling them away. The gang spread out, kicking over kiosks, tearing garlands from their hooks, and crushing ornaments underfoot. Jack watched from his chair, still dressed as Santa, his mind racing. He clenched his gloved fists, feeling the thin fabric against his knuckles. Years of silence and calm had dulled his instincts, but not erased them. He could feel the old rhythm stirring, the familiar pull of action. Yet he stayed seated, his expression frozen. "Someone stop them!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos as she darted back toward the management office. She glanced at Jack with pleading eyes before disappearing. At the far end of the plaza, Max emerged, a skinny, sharp-faced young man in his early 20s, wearing the mall's green employee vest. Max's chest rose and fell rapidly, but his jaw was set in determination. He picked up a discarded broom and marched toward a biker who was swinging a chain at a reindeer decoration. "Hey, knock it off!" Max shouted. The biker turned, his sneer deepening. "What are you gonna do, kid? Sweep me up?" The chain whipped through the air, striking Max across the arm. He stumbled back with a cry of pain, clutching his elbow. Something snapped inside Jack. "Enough," he muttered under his breath. Slowly, Jack rose from his chair. The leader of the gang, Cobra, noticed him immediately, his sharp eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Well, well," Cobra said, pointing a finger at Jack. "Santa Claus wants to get involved? You got something to say, old man?" Jack walked toward Max, helping him to his feet. "Are you all right?" Max nodded, his face pale. I was just trying to stop them." Jack looked at the boy, his voice low but firm. "Go. Now." Max hesitated, then stumbled back toward the stores out of harm's way. Jack turned his gaze to Cobra, his posture shifting ever so slightly. His movements, though calm, radiated purpose. A predator carefully stepping into the open. Cobra tilted his head. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." He gestured to his gang. "Show Santa what happens when you cross us." One of the bikers lunged forward, aiming a punch straight for Jack's face. Jack sidestepped effortlessly, catching the man's wrist in one gloved hand and twisting it hard. The biker screamed as he fell to his knees. Jack released him and stepped back, his expression impassive. Another biker charged in, swinging a metal pipe. Jack ducked under the arc of the swing, swept his leg out, and sent the man crashing onto the floor with a sickening thud. It was over in seconds. Controlled, efficient, and brutal. The mall grew eerily quiet. Cobra stared at Jack, his sneer gone. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Jack said nothing. He simply stood, his presence filling the space. For a moment it felt as though the air itself had stilled. Cobra clenched his fists. "You think this is over, old man? We'll be back. And next time you won't be so lucky." With a wave of his hand, Cobra called his men to retreat. The gang mounted their bikes, engines roaring back to life as they tore out of the mall, leaving broken decorations and shattered glass in their wake. Jack exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Around him, shoppers began emerging from their hiding places, murmuring in shock and awe. Max approached cautiously, holding his bruised arm. "Santa, what did you just do?" Jack met the boy's gaze, his voice calm but heavy. "I did what needed to be done." Across the mall, Sarah returned, her expression a mix of relief and fear. Jack knew what she would say before she opened her mouth. "They're coming back," she whispered, "and next time they'll be ready." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. He could feel the quiet life he had built crumbling around him. The mall had fallen into an uneasy silence, like the calm before a storm. Broken glass crunched underfoot as Sarah surveyed the damage. Decorations lay strewn across the floor, and shattered ornaments glimmered like fallen stars. Jack stood nearby, silent, still dressed as Santa, his mind elsewhere. "They'll come back," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at Jack with a mixture of trust and desperation. "We can't just let them terrorize this place. Jack, you..." "Don't," he interrupted softly. "I'm no hero." Sarah frowned but said nothing, watching as Jack turned and walked away, his steps heavy with unspoken weight. By evening, the mall had emptied. Jack changed out of the Santa suit, stuffing the red fabric into a locker. As he exited through a side door, he noticed Max pacing near the loading dock, his face set with determination. "You shouldn't be here," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. Max turned to him, fists clenched. "They're coming back, Jack. You heard Cobra. They're not done. Someone has to stop them." Jack eyed the young man for a moment. "And you think that's you?" Max straightened, puffing out his chest despite the bruise forming on his arm. "If no one else will, then yeah, I can't let them ruin this place. My mom works here. My sister shops here. People like them don't get to win." Jack sighed, running a hand through his short hair. He saw too much of himself in Max, young, angry, and full of fire. "You don't understand what you're asking for." Before Max could respond, a distant growl of engines rumbled to life. Jack turned his head sharply, eyes narrowing. "They're here," Max whispered. Out of the darkness, Cobra and his gang appeared, their headlights slicing through the night like piercing eyes. They roared toward the loading dock, tires screeching as they skidded to a halt. Cobra dismounted first, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he pointed at Jack. "Looks like you didn't get my message, old man," Cobra sneered. "You want another round? Fine by me." Jack stepped forward, positioning himself in front of Max. "You need to leave." Cobra laughed darkly. "Not until we're done here." He gestured to two of his men. "Make an example out of them." The bikers moved in. Jack's muscles tensed, his mind sharpening into the familiar clarity of combat. The first man lunged with a crowbar, but Jack sidestepped fluidly, gripping the man's wrist and driving an elbow into his gut. The biker crumpled to the ground with a gasp. The second swung a heavy chain. Jack ducked, grabbing the chain mid-swing and yanking the man off balance. With a swift kick to the chest, the second biker hit the pavement hard, groaning in pain. Max stood frozen, watching Jack with wide eyes. How did you do that?" "Get back," Jack ordered. Cobra's grin faltered as he realized this was no ordinary man. "What are you?" he snarled, his hand hovering near the knife on his belt. Jack didn't answer. His steady gaze alone was enough. Cobra hesitated, then whistled sharply. "Fall back!" The gang retreated, but Cobra pointed at Jack before mounting his bike. "This isn't over, Santa. You've made a big mistake." The roar of their engines faded into the night, leaving behind an uneasy quiet. Jack exhaled slowly, his fists unclenching. Around him, the loading dock was littered with unconscious bikers and shattered debris. Max approached cautiously, awe and fear mingling in his expression. "You're not just some guy, are you?" Jack didn't respond immediately. He turned toward the dark horizon, his voice low and distant. "Go home, Max, this isn't your fight. But go." Max swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly before walking away. Alone again, Jack stared into the night, the weight of what had just happened settling on his shoulders. He had exposed too much. For years, he had buried the part of himself that knew how to fight, how to hurt. But tonight, it had surfaced. And somewhere out there, Cobra was preparing to return, stronger, angrier, and ready for revenge. Jack turned toward the mall's empty parking lot, his breath visible in the cold air. The quiet he had fought so hard to achieve was slipping away, and this time, there would be no escaping it. The night was still when Jack returned to his modest house on the outskirts of town. A thin layer of frost blanketed the grass, shimmering under the pale glow of the moon. Jack closed the door behind him and locked it, though he knew no lock could keep out the ghosts that followed him. He set his worn bag down by the door and sank into the old armchair by the window. Outside, the faint hum of the city felt distant, muffled by the quiet isolation he'd chosen for himself. For years, this small house had been his refuge, a place where he could bury the man he once was, a man who had taken lives, destroyed enemies, and disappeared without a trace. Jack rested his elbows on his knees, pressing his palms against his face. The fight at the loading dock replayed in his mind, every movement, every strike. The precision of it disturbed him. He hadn't hesitated, not for a second. He let his hands fall and stared at his reflection in the darkened window. "You promised," he muttered to himself, his voice low and hollow. "You promised to stop." Promises. They had been easy to make when no one was looking for him, when the world had forgotten his name. He had left that life behind for good reason, because violence had a cost, and it always came due. Jack leaned back and closed his eyes, but it was no use. Memories surged forward, a desert battlefield, heat pressing down like a weight, the echo of gunfire in his ears, the face of a man he couldn't save, another regret etched into his soul. The knock at the door shattered his thoughts. Jack's eyes shot open, his body instinctively tensing. He rose silently, padding across the creaky wooden floor to peer through the peephole. Sarah stood outside, her breath visible in the cold, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. Jack hesitated before opening the door. "It's late." Sarah stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her face etched with worry. "They're going to come back, Jack. You know that, don't you?" "I know," he replied, his tone resigned. She looked around the small, sparse room as if searching for answers. "What are you running from?" Jack turned his back to her, staring at the window. "I'm not running." "Then why are you here, alone, hiding in this place?" Her voice softened. "Those people at the mall, the ones who look up to you, they need help." "We need help." Jack didn't answer. Sarah stepped closer, her voice steady but pleading. "You saved Max tonight. You saved all of us. I know there's more to you than you let on, but whatever you're afraid of, you can't let it win." He turned to face her, his jaw tight. "I'm not afraid of them." "Then prove it," she challenged. "Help us stop them." Jack said nothing. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room where an old battered trunk sat, its lid covered in dust. It held pieces of a life he had locked away. Equipment, weapons, memories. Sarah watched him carefully, sensing his hesitation. "Don't let them take this town, Jack. Don't let them take everything." She turned and left, leaving the door open behind her. Jack stood there for a long moment, his thoughts a storm inside his head. Finally, he moved toward the trunk, his footsteps heavy, his shadow stretching across the floor. Outside, the frost thickened, spreading slowly across the window pane. By dawn, the city woke to a nightmare. Black smoke rose against the pale winter sky, curling above rooftops like dark signals of war. Cobra's gang had returned, this time with a vengeance. They tore through the streets on roaring motorcycles, their leather jackets a blur of silver and black as they left chaos in their wake. Jack stood on his porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The distant sounds of shattering glass and wailing sirens reached his ears. The wind carried the acrid scent of burning wood. It had begun. In the center of town, stores were ransacked, windows smashed, and holiday decorations trampled under heavy boots. Cobra's men laughed as they lit dumpsters on fire, their flames licking hungrily at nearby walls. The city's spirit, so bright the day before, now felt small and fragile. Jack walked slowly down his front steps, his breath visible in the freezing air. He'd been here before. Different city, same destruction. Back then, he'd been part of the storm. Now he was watching it unfold like a helpless bystander. At the edge of the plaza, Sarah and a small crowd of residents stood frozen, fear etched on their faces. Max appeared beside her, his fists clenched, knuckles white. "They're tearing everything apart," he shouted, his voice breaking. "We have to do something." Sarah turned to Jack, her eyes pleading. "Jack, please! They're destroying the town! People are scared!" Jack met her gaze but said nothing. He wasn't ready, not yet. Max stepped forward, his voice sharp with frustration. "If we don't stop them, they'll burn everything to the ground." Jack studied the boy, seeing the fire in his eyes. It was reckless, but it was brave. He placed a steadying hand on Max's shoulder. "You can't fight them alone. Then what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Call the police? They won't get here in time." Jack exhaled slowly, his mind already working. He glanced at the smoke rising above the rooftops, the faint roar of engines echoing in the distance. There was no avoiding this, not anymore. "We plan," he said finally, his tone quiet but firm. "We prepare." Back at the mall, Jack stood in the shattered remains of the plaza. He ran his hand over a broken display case, his expression distant. This place had been his refuge, but now it was a battleground. Sarah and Max followed close behind him. "They'll come back tonight," Jack said, turning to face them. "They'll want to finish what they started." Sarah swallowed hard. "What can we do?" Jack's gaze hardened. "We fight back." Max's eyes lit up. "You mean it?" Jack nodded. "But we do it smart." He turned to Sarah. "Get the word out to anyone who'll listen. Tell them to meet here tonight. I'll show them what to do." Sarah hesitated, then nodded and hurried away. Max stood beside Jack, his voice quieter now. "What about you? What are you going to do?" Jack looked toward the horizon where smoke still hung low like a warning. "I'm going to get ready." As night fell, a fragile resolve began to build among the townspeople. They gathered at the mall in small clusters, shop owners, clerks, and neighbors, nervous but determined. Jack stood before them, his posture strong and steady. "You don't need to be soldiers," he said, his voice calm and measured. "You just need to be ready." He pointed to entrances they would need to barricade, exits they could use as escape routes. He showed them makeshift weapons, broom handles, tools, even chairs, anything that could slow the invaders. Jack moved with purpose, a quiet authority that none dared question. Max watched him closely, soaking in every word, every movement. To him, Jack wasn't just a man anymore. He was something more, something they all needed. From the rooftop, Jack surveyed the dark streets, his breath fogging the cold air. The gang would come soon, he knew, and this time they'd be ready. The mall's interior felt like a war room. Jack stood at the center, calm but resolute, his voice carrying over the murmur of anxious townspeople. If we're going to stand a chance, we need to work together. This isn't about fighting, it's about surviving. Around him, makeshift weapons were piled on tables, broom handles, metal rods, and heavy tools scavenged from storage rooms. Sarah paced nearby, organizing small groups of volunteers while Max helped stack supplies near the entrances. They moved quickly, driven by a blend of fear and determination. Jack examined the crowd. Faces that had once been filled with holiday cheer were now etched with tension. Shopkeepers, clerks, and neighbors, all strangers to violence, looked to him for leadership. He didn't want this responsibility, but it was his now. "We don't attack head-on," Jack continued, pointing to a crude map of the mall spread across a table. "We control their movement, use the space, make them come to us." He tapped key locations on the map: the main plaza, service hallways, and storage areas. "We'll create choke points here, here, and here. Force them into tight spots where they can't use their numbers." Max's eyes gleamed as he absorbed the plan. "And what about the exits? Shouldn't we leave a way out?" Jack nodded. "Exactly. We give them a way to retreat, make them think it's their choice. When they run, we let them go." Sarah approached, arms crossed, her voice steady but uncertain. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jack's gaze flicked to her, his jaw tightening. "A long time ago." "Let's just hope it's enough," she replied softly, before returning to the volunteers. Jack moved from group to group, instructing each cluster on their role. Some would barricade entrances with furniture. Others would hold positions in the hallways, ready to distract and delay the bikers. Every movement was precise, controlled, and efficient. Near the back entrance, Max tested the weight of a metal pipe, frowning as he adjusted his grip. Jack stopped beside him, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," Jack said quietly. Max glanced up, determination blazing in his eyes. "Yes, I do. You said we work together. I can help." Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, stay in the shadows. Never stand still. Keep your head down and don't play the hero." Max grinned faintly. "Got it, Santa." Jack allowed himself the smallest of smiles before moving on. As he walked through the mall, the preparations taking shape around him, he felt something stir, a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. The people were ready, and for the first time they weren't just afraid, they were hopeful. The distant growl of engines shattered the quiet, growing louder with every second. Jack looked toward the glass doors where faint headlights flickered in the darkness. They were coming. Jack exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady as he spoke to the crowd. "Positions, stay sharp." The townspeople scattered, slipping into the shadows, hearts pounding as the sound of the motorcycles echoed closer. Jack stepped forward, his silhouette framed against the glass doors. For years, he had fought to bury this part of himself, to leave the fighter behind. But tonight, he would use every skill, every tactic, to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. The battle for the town was about to begin. The engines roared louder, rattling the mall's glass doors. A deep hum of dread settled over the dimly lit plaza as the townspeople held their positions, hidden behind makeshift barricades and within the shadows of stores. Jack stood at the center of the square, his silhouette tall and unmoving. His calm presence steadied the crowd's nerves. They weren't fighters, but they believed in him. He was their anchor. The motorcycles burst into view like a swarm of locusts. Cobra led the charge, his silver snake emblem glinting under the mall's harsh fluorescent lights. Behind him, his gang thundered through the shattered doors, tires squealing as they fanned out across the plaza. "All right, boys," Cobra growled, dismounting with a cocky grin. "Show this town what happens when they cross us." The gang began spreading destruction, smashing store windows, tearing down displays, and overturning furniture. The air filled with the sounds of breaking glass, wild laughter, and the cries of terrified shoppers still huddled in hiding. Jack moved forward, his boots echoing against the tiles. He raised his voice, calm but firm. "You don't belong here." Cobra's laughter cut through the chaos like a blade. "And who's going to stop us? You, old man?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, a silent signal. Suddenly, the mall erupted into action. From behind counters and furniture, townspeople sprang into motion. A shopkeeper flung a crate of tools, scattering the bikers. Metal pipes and wooden planks swung through the air as others used the environment to their advantage, tripping riders, toppling shelves, and sealing exits with barricades. Max emerged from the shadows, wielding a broom handle. He struck at the legs of a biker, trying to climb a barricade, knocking him to the ground with a thud. "Not so tough now, huh?" Max shouted, though his voice wavered with adrenaline. Jack darted into the chaos like a ghost, his movements sharp and deliberate. A biker swung a crowbar at him, but Jack ducked, countering with a precise elbow strike that sent the man sprawling. Another charged at him with a knife, but Jack twisted the blade from his grip and sent him crashing into a glass display. The gang began to falter. They hadn't expected resistance, not like this. Cobra's face darkened as he watched his men struggle. "Get up, fight!" Cobra roared, fury boiling over. But Jack's plan was working. The townspeople, though inexperienced, stuck to the strategy, using choke points and ambushes to keep the gang scattered. The bikers couldn't overwhelm them. Cobra snarled, ripping the chain from his belt as he strode toward Jack. "Enough of this!" Jack turned, his eyes locking with Cobra's. For the first time, Jack saw the true danger in him. A predator, unrelenting and proud. Cobra swung the chain high, aiming for Jack's head. Jack dodged, the metal links whipping past him with a sharp crack. "You've got some fight in you," Cobra sneered, circling him like a wolf. "But I know what you are. You can't hide it forever." Jack's jaw tightened. He blocked Cobra's next swing with his forearm, gritting his teeth against the sting of impact. He seized the chain midair, yanked it hard, and drove a punch into Cobra's gut. The gang leader stumbled back, coughing, but grinned through the pain. "You're better than this town, aren't you?" Cobra taunted, his voice venomous. "You're one of us." Jack stepped back, shaking his head. "No, I'm not." Their duel continued, Cobra attacking with wild strength, Jack countering with precision. Around them, the townspeople held their ground. Max fought beside Sarah, using their barricade to keep another biker pinned down. The mall echoed with the sounds of struggle, but it was clear. Jack's plan was holding. Finally, Cobra faltered. Jack grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against a broken display. The gang leader groaned, stunned. "Call them off," Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous. Cobra's grin faltered. He glanced around, realizing his gang was scattered, outmatched. "Fall back," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Retreat!" The bikers hesitated, then scrambled for their bikes. Engines roared to life as they fled, leaving a trail of broken glass and bruised egos behind. Cobra staggered to his feet, glaring at Jack with hatred. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You have no idea what's coming." Jack let him go, his breathing heavy. Cobra limped toward his bike, his words lingering in the cold air as the gang disappeared into the night. The plaza grew still once more. The townspeople emerged slowly, their faces pale and wide-eyed, but alive. Max raised his fist triumphantly. "We did it!" Cheers rippled through the crowd, but Jack remained silent. He stared after Cobra, knowing the battle had only postponed something worse. Sarah approached him, her expression one of relief and worry. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, his face set in grim resolve. "They will, but we'll be ready." The mall was silent, save for the occasional crackle of broken glass underfoot. The air was heavy, thick with smoke and exhaustion. Jack stood alone near the shattered remains of a storefront, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The townspeople were regrouping, tending to bruises and sharing quiet words of relief, but Jack felt no victory. He knew Cobra wasn't finished. "Not bad for Santa Claus," a voice called out. Jack turned slowly. Cobra stood near the entrance, blood trickling from a cut on his brow, his leather jacket torn. Yet he smiled, a predator's smile. "You're tougher than you look," Cobra said, taking a slow step forward. His movements were strained, but his voice carried venom. "And you fight like someone who knows how to hurt people. You've done this before, haven't you?" Jack's expression remained cold. "Leave this town alone, Cobra. You've lost." Cobra laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed through the empty plaza. "Lost? This was just a warm-up." He gestured to the destruction around him. "Look at this place. You're trying to protect them, but you're not one of them. You're something else, something darker." Jack clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I?" Cobra sneered. "I know exactly who you are. Jack Frost, former elite agent, ghost operative, the man they sent to clean up the mess when no one else could." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Jack's breath caught as memories surged. Images he had tried to bury deep. The deserts, the rainforests, the faces of men who never made it home. He had been a ghost, a weapon wielded in the shadows, and no amount of time could erase the stains of that life. Cobra's grin widened as he saw the flicker of pain cross Jack's face. I heard the stories. You disappeared years ago, didn't you? Went soft. Started pretending you could live a normal life. But here's the thing. Men like you can't change. Violence is in your blood. Jack stepped forward, his voice low and steady. You don't know me, Cobra. You don't know what I've done. I know enough, Cobra replied. And I know you'll have to become that man again if you want to stop me. Because this isn't over. You can't hide behind this town forever. Jack stared at him, the weight of those words sinking in. Cobra wasn't wrong. For years, Jack had fought to bury that part of himself, to leave behind the killer he once was. But now, the people of this town were counting on him. If he didn't act, more would suffer. Cobra backed away slowly, mounting his motorcycle with a grimace. See you soon, Jack Frost. The roar of Cobra's engine tore through the silence as he disappeared into the night, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. Jack exhaled shakily, his gaze falling on his trembling hands. He had hoped he could protect this place without losing himself, but the truth was clear now. To defeat Cobra, he would have to embrace the past he feared most. The quiet didn't last long. Cobra returned under the cover of darkness, his gang moving like shadows through the town. Jack knew they would come, this time with intent to break him. But he wasn't ready for what came next. The faint sound of shattering glass jolted him awake. He ran toward the plaza, heart pounding, only to stop cold. There, in the center of the square, stood Cobra, holding Sarah by the arm. A knife glinted under the pale moonlight, pressed against her throat. I told you, Cobra growled, his voice dripping with malice. You can't win. Let her go, Jack demanded, his voice steady, though his chest tightened painfully. He took slow steps forward, his hands raised. This is between you and me. Cobra smiled cruelly. Then come and get her. Jack moved faster than thought, his instincts driving him. Cobra's men surged forward, but Jack fought with desperate precision. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Blows landed hard, but his focus never wavered. He had to get to Sarah. In the chaos, Cobra slashed wildly, and Jack felt the searing pain of a knife cutting into his side. He staggered but didn't stop. Summoning his last strength, Jack wrenched Cobra's arm, forcing him to drop the knife. Sarah broke free, stumbling towards safety. Jack collapsed to one knee, blood seeping through his shirt as Cobra retreated, battered but alive. The fight was won, but Jack knew the cost had been heavy. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the battered town. The mall stood in silence, its shattered glass and overturned displays a stark reminder of the night before. Yet, amid the wreckage, there was something new, a sense of resilience. Jack sat on the edge of a bench in the square, his side bandaged, his movement slow and deliberate. Despite the pain, his gaze was calm, watching as townspeople began to rebuild. Sarah approached, her face tired but hopeful. They're gone, she said softly. For good this time. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. For now. Sarah sat beside him, her eyes searching his. You saved us, Jack. All of us. And you didn't have to. Jack's eyes drifted toward the horizon, his voice low. I did what needed to be done. Nearby, Max stood with a group of volunteers carrying boards and supplies to repair storefronts. He caught Jack's eye and gave a small, grateful nod. Jack returned it, feeling a rare warmth in his chest. This town has a chance now, Sarah continued. Because of you. Jack exhaled, a slow, measured breath. No, because of all of you. As he rose to his feet, Sarah watched him carefully. Where will you go now? Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon where the snow was beginning to fall, soft and steady. Where I'm needed, he said finally. He turned to leave, but as he reached his car, he noticed a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Inside, a single note read, This isn't over. Someone is watching. Jack stared at the message, the wind carrying the faint echoes of distant engines. For now, the town was safe, but the fight was far from over. The story of Jack Frost reminds us that no matter how much we try to bury our past, there comes a time when we must face it head-on. Sometimes the skills we fear the most can become tools to protect and inspire others. Jack's journey proves that true strength isn't just in fighting battles, but in knowing when to step up and embrace who we are for the greater good. How would you have acted if your peaceful life was shattered? Would you fight for those who couldn't defend themselves, or would you run? Click on the video on the screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and uncover more stories that inspire and challenge us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join our community and stay connected for more powerful tales. See you in the next video.